I felt the alpha's blood coursing through me, making me feel invincible. But when his exotic-looking companion corners me, I can't help but feel like I've just stepped into the deep end of a very dangerous pool. 21. I lifted my gaze from my plate, the chicken wing in my fingers falling onto it with a light tapping sound, raking my eyes over her face, just to make sure it was truly her to speak. It did not surprise me to find that she was pretty. Now I could look at her without feeling rude. Since she spoke to me, I noted her dimpled chin and slender nose. Her brows were arched and well-styled, her lashes long and kissed with makeup. "Are you talking to me?" I questioned. She blinked, a small smile gracing her lips. "Of course. You're new here, right?" Swallowing, I nodded, shifting my weight. "I am, well, I'm Piper." I'd formally introduced myself. She grinned, holding out her hand to me. Eyed it curiously, but joined mine to hers and gave it a gentle shake. Her hands were slender and soft, a warmth coming from her that riveled the water behind me. "I'm 𝐊𝐢𝐬." I nodded, dropping my hand. "I hate to state the obvious here, but you are a human, right?" She cocked her head. Was she genuinely being this? Nice and talkative. "I am." I nodded again, feeling like a flag in a breeze. Someone jostled me, causing me to stumble from the impact. My eyes flew to see the female giving me a grimace. But Piper caught on, taking my elbow and pulling me around to stand beside her. She grinned at me, 1 or 2 inches taller than me, pulling me a little closer. She breathed deeply, letting out a content sigh as she exhaled. "You smell like a wolf." I frowned, casting a glance at Osra to see a male by the barbecues had pulled him away. I had a blood transfusion, glancing down at my torso. I gestured lazily with my hand. "I got badly injured." She gasped when she saw the scar I gestured to. "Oh, you poor thing. Those hunts are so brutal. You look a lot better now." I saw 𝐿𝐢 still standing where I was previously, and she gave me a confused look to which I shrugged at. She scanned the female beside me with scrutiny before looking towards her alpha. Only then did she shrug and wave goodbye, leaving me with Piper. "I feel better." I smiled tightly. "I bet. You're a wonderful swimmer, too. I saw you go under for a long time. I bet that helped your leg heal up." My lips quirked in amusement. "It feels good. I enjoy swimming." "Me too." She grinned, shaking her shoulders. "Oh, 𝐊𝐢𝐬. We have to talk." "We do." She giggled. "Yes, I'd love to get to know the new pack member." I was about to point out the various other members, such as Olivia, but decided against it. Maybe she had already met her when I was in a weird drug-induced coma. But she wasn't here when I woke, so tell me something about yourself. There isn't a lot to tell. I shrugged, looking back to my cooling dinner. I was found and brought here from my village. She noticed my obvious attention to my food and let out a small snort. With a delicate grace, her pink-painted sharp nails picked up my chicken wing and eyed it curiously. "You know, you should try the burgers. They are so good." She chuckled. It took aback me when she pulled my chicken wing apart, raising half of the meat to my face. She pushed it against my lips, giving me a grin of encouragement. This was something Everett often tried to do to Olive over dinner. Eve claimed it was to show care to another, but also could be seen as flirtatious, and so it shocked me when this stranger was keen to share. My eyes roamed freely with shock, locking onto the intense gaze of my mate behind Piper's back. He locked his dark blue eyes on me, the cooking tongs in his hand paused midway to pick up a burger. He was keen to get on my bad side, keen to bring me down. So, with a smirk of bubbling adrenaline, I parted my lips. His eyes narrowed as Piper pushed the chicken past my lips, her finger grazing my mouth as it left. He was rigid, tense as he glowered at me, shifting uncomfortably. He was about to come over to us when Piper giggled. I snapped my attention back to her, to see her giving me a keen smirk. "I think you'll settle in here very well," she timed, eating the other half. "Thanks." I smiled, blushing. "Don't you usually live here?" She cocked her head, and I blabbered to continue. "I saw you arrive yesterday, so I just wondered." Her eyes widened with realization, a small giggle escaping her lips. "Oh, you saw that? But no, I am not from this pack. I'm from another continental pack. Though, across the ocean." "Oh, really? What's it called?" I wondered. I could do some research later. Perhaps. My pack is the 𝐊𝐢𝐬 pack. My father is the Alpha. I hesitated before giving in to my curiosity. "And you and Alpha Osra are?" Her lips twitched slightly, the corners of her eyes grimacing for a moment. That was curious. I wonder why that triggered a reaction. "We're intended," she stated unemotionally. "Intended? Oh, humans. So much to learn." She sighed, dramatically, changing the subject. "We will have to hang out, so I can teach you more and we can get to know each other." I hesitated at her eagerness, but took the moment to appraise her. Despite her natural beauty, I didn't find her as a threat. If she and Osra were intended, then it had to mean there was something there. And if he cared for her, all the better. I didn't want to be here anyway. "Okay, that sounds good." I nodded, picking up another piece of the chicken wing. She beamed, her white perfect teeth taking me by surprise. "Oh, thank you. I can't wait to get to know you better. There's just something about you. It draws me in." Wasn't the first time I had heard that. I must have voiced that out loud, because she laughed. "Oh, you are funny too. It's a breath of fresh air from this pack. They're all so serious and dated." "They are." I wondered. Well, half of them. The elder wolves are stuck in the past. A lot of things could do with updating. Morals especially. "Yeah, I think I know what you mean." I nodded, thinking about a certain nurse. Someone suddenly shouted at her, and she turned to give them a broad grin, her hair shining as she spun around. 1 second. Looking back at me, she stepped forward to embrace me. My free hand wrapped around her back with surprise as both of hers cupped my sides. "Come find me tomorrow morning," she questioned once he pulled away. "Sure." "Oh, that's silly of me. You can't smell me," she giggled. "I will be down for breakfast. I love weekend breakfasts." I lowered my hand, giving her a hopefully encouraging smile. "Okay, I'll see you then." With a final breathtaking grin, she spun away to stride over to the woman that shouted for her. I stood there gobsmacked for a moment, my brain lagging and processing what just happened. Shaking my head, I picked up another chicken wing as I went, since she ate half of mine. Making my way around the lake, I felt eyes burning into the back of my head. I don't know how I knew someone was watching, usually putting it down to paranoia, but this time it was intense. Raising my eyes from where I was walking, I looked over my shoulder, connecting my gaze with the Alpha straight away. Osra's eyes were still blazing with restraint as he stared emotional as lie into my eyes. The corner of my mouth twitched as I ran my eyes along his tight T-shirt before flicking them back up to his face. A slither of frustration marred the crease in his brow, and my lips pulled into a full-blown grin at the accomplishment. It was so easy to get under this man's skin, rejecting his presence. I turned my attention back to my destination. Eve was sitting on a blanket. Her dark eyes locked on me, just like the others were. As soon as I reached them, I was flooded with an abundance of questions, most of which I could answer to their satisfaction. Damn, that's weird. You becoming friends with your mate's thing. 𝐿𝐲𝐻's nose crinkled. I scoffed, shaking my head. He isn't my mate. The way he looked when you took the chicken from her hand, he was a blaze of fire. If it wasn't for Caleb holding him back. She grinned. I shook my head, dismissing it. Besides the point. Eve, she said something to me I have heard many times now. What's that? Eve wondered, crossing her arms. She said there is something about me that intrigues her, that draws her in. Maya has said the same thing to me before. What is going on? Do I smell good enough to eat? Is Piper going to eat me? My voice trailed to a whisper. The others snorted, but Eve gave me a sympathetic smile. It's not a taste for your human flesh, 𝐊𝐲𝐬, more a taste of your soul. I blanched, blinking at her. What? She was serious for a second longer before bursting into a fit of giggles. I exhaled heavily, sheeting her a glare as I chewed on my corn cob. Okay, but seriously. Eve giggled breathlessly. I think it's because you are a werewolf's mate. You have a pull that people can't quite understand. So, naturally, we want to know more. We are animals. I rolled my eyes. And if the roles are reversed, what do you mean? She wondered. Why do I feel so warm around some of you? She blushed lightly, looking at her sister. It was 𝐿𝐲 who answered my question. Eve was too shy to acknowledge my attraction. We have, like, an essence. It calls to weaker species. Those stories you said you were told as a kid, probably true. Maya shrugged. Wolves and orcs close to their heat will attract. But otherwise, it's just a way for you to find a suitable mate. Ugh, I screeched. With Piper. With you? She laughed. I'm flattered you think of me that way. Rolling my eyes, I picked at my food again. You wish. She grinned. What I mean is, wolves who you feel drawn to are likely to be a good match. Do you feel the same around Alpha? I grimaced, trying not to acknowledge the attraction I felt towards him. So, instead, I changed the conversation's direction. That's not it. It can't be. I shook my head. Unhuman. I don't have werewolf traits. Even humans have senses. Perhaps it is what you call your sixth sense, or just your nature's call. You're drawn to us because we have magic in our bones, and we are drawn to your fragility and innocence. Sighing, I gave her a small nod. Okay. So, you're all just freakishly attractive, and I have no choice but to lather myself in the attention. Got it. They all laughed, Olive even chiming in a light-hearted giggle. Maya snorted, her head falling back as she leaned on her shoulders. Her chest heaved with quiet laughter, but she didn't provoke me any further. Eve remained flushed, but held a small smile on her face as she caught my eye. How long do you guys usually stay out here? I wondered once my plate was empty. Quite a while. We have a communal swim. Just two. You know, try the old wolf's tale. Then we shift and go for a run when the moon rises. Eve explained. I felt my chest sink with worry. Shift. Eve nodded. We go for a run until the alpha decides we have to turn back in. What do I do? I wondered. Stay here. Go home. Or try to keep up. Eliza smirked. Knowing she was joking, I tuttied at her. Like I could catch up to you. They laughed again, plunging us into a comfortable silence. The next few hours blurred together as I hung out with them. Occasionally, we would dip into the water, the wolves of the group going back for more food every so often. We even tried out a game of chicken, and they put me against Olive since she was human. I was on MYA's shoulders, her hands grasping my lower thigh as we eyed 𝐿𝐲𝐬 and Olive. Eve, the referee, whistled for us to go, with a warrior cry. MYA moved us closer, my hands darting out to push Olive from 𝐿𝐲𝐬's shoulders. It was a tussle of giggles and too much hair to see straight until I was able to push the smaller human from 𝐿𝐲𝐬's shoulders. They both fell backwards, a triumphant cheer coming from both MYA and I. Her hands released my thighs just as mine raised in the air to acknowledge my win, causing me to lose balance. I had been relying on her strength for holding me to her. So as soon as she let go, so did I. I gasped with surprise as I fell backwards, my body hitting the water instantly. I embraced the shocking hug of the lake, its warmth seeping into my bones and relaxing my mind and soul. It was a weird kind of healing therapy that I absolutely loved. I never knew water could be so refreshing and welcoming. I wondered if the others felt the same. If they did, they didn't show it. Their faces passive as they swam, coming up for air. MYA was laughing all of us, including Eve, who had been too close to me when I fell and now was soaked in water. I wiped the water from my eyes, grinning at her. This day was actually super fun. I was glad I came down to enjoy it. Call it a spur of the alpha blood, but the adrenaline and power in my bones was exhilarating. Perhaps I could join them on the run after all. Snorting to myself, I dismissed the idea. With every passing moment, the sun grew lower into the sky, until it was a mere slither. The air grew chillier, as if in anticipation of what was to come. Wolves shifting. I do hope they are cuter than the ones I have seen so far. 22 ready. I turned to look at 𝐿𝐲𝐬, finding her attention solely focused on MYA. The sun was setting now, its colors fading beyond the horizon. The entire pack was gathering at the far end of the lake, the energy buzzing as they all wore enormous grins. I saw Asra stood at the head of them, tall and proud as he waited for the stragglers to gather. The air felt strange. I shook it off to being nothing but a bad thought. Yeah? Let's go. 𝐿𝐲𝐬 gave me a once-over. Are you sure you don't want to go to the house with Olive? I nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. I'm just going to swim until you come back. About an hour, right? Okay, if you're sure. She shrugged. Don't drown or anything. They walked away after I gave them another affirmative nod, Eve already being promptly on time and waiting in the crowd. It felt warm tonight. That or the blood in my system was making me feel that way. I wrapped my arms around my bare torso in comfort, sitting myself on the blankets. Olive and a few other humans made their way back to the house, and I found myself all alone as the wolves chittered excitedly. The energy grew almost palpable. Shrieking excitement came from the crowd of wolves as the last rays of sun kissed the horizon. Ezra raised one hand, commanding the attention of all the wolves without even making a sound. A hush fell upon them. The only sounds were the swaying of fabrics as they impatiently jostled each other. Cardinal pack. Tonight we run under the new moon. Stay on course, he commanded. I shuddered, pulling my knees tighter to myself as his words held a warning. The moment he lowered his hands, I watched with shocked amazement when the first wolf shifted. The multitude of crunching and popping bones caused my hands to raise to block out the sound. Fur of all different colors, patterns and shades sprouted from four-legged beings. Tails swirled and swished. ears elevating as fangs forced their way through wolf-sized snouts. Once the entire, terrifyingly large pack had shifted, only one remained. 𝐻𝐵 stood tall amongst the beasts, his tall frame overpowering them even in his human skin. His dark eyes met mine from across the lake, huddled alone under the trees. His tongue darted out to lick his lips before his head bent towards his chest. I watched with a strange intention as his spine began to arch and snap, his head twisting as a large, dark snout elongated from his human jaw. His arms hung low, enormous paws dragging along the ground as his body lengthened and grew. All the while, dark fur sought the tepid air, covering his skin in a thick, heavy blanket. I exhaled heavily when his wolf's head rose over the top of the others, dark eyes so dazzling and sharp as he found me once more. His wolf, although horrifying, did not make any move towards me, his eyes taking in my smaller frame with a quick glance. He dropped his gaze quickly, bending his head backwards to expose his throat. My breath hitched when a low, breathy howl left his snout, the air clouding above his head as the final rays of sun fell beyond the skyline. A chorus of appraisal followed him, the deafening and excited howls and yips of his pack eager to run. Dropping his head back to the center, he quickly bowed once before they all exploded into a run. The pounding of paws was loud, growing quieter as they disappeared into the trees until I was sitting there, all alone, sighing. I rested my head on my knees and basked in the loneliness for a while. My eyes stared down at the blue lake, watching the way it darkened before lightening as the sun rose. I could see the illumination of the moon's halo in the water and felt a deep urge to swim, shredding the blanket from my shoulders. I stood from the ground and made my way towards the lake's edge. I had been in here so much today, but something about the moon shining on the water's surface had me wanting to try it more. The water was still warm when I stepped into its shallow depths, a soft hum rumbling my throat as I walked in deeper. It felt like a buzzing of bees along my skin, a pleasurable tickle of heat. Standing chest deep, I lifted my feet and began to swim. I started doing slow circles for a while, enjoying the way the water glided down my body. After my 13 flap, I stopped a little way from the waterfall. Eyeing it curiously, I followed the rock face to seek a pathway. There, I thought, along the right-hand side, opposite to where I first came in, swimming to the edge of the pool. I crawled my way out of the water before mindlessly wandering my way up the rocky path. I slipped a few times, my feet too wet for the slimy surface, but I caught myself before my head hit the ground. My knees and palms took most of the fall, but when I was 20 feet high, I didn't seem to think that was so bad. Wow, I breathed. The view from up here was magnificent. I was as tall as some of the younger trees, but I could see things beyond the bushes and hedgerows that I couldn't from the ground. The wolf blood in my system gave me some incredible energy, and I hoped that this wouldn't be the end of this drug-induced buzz. Sitting down, I slowly slid myself to the edge of the rock, being mindful of where the gentle stream cascaded into the lake below. I knew it was deep down there, having explored the depths on my own. I never got to the other side of the waterfall before I had Eve calling me in a state of worry that I made round. But now I was alone. I was alone. The gravity of the situation never dawned on me, truly, until now. And it wasn't a bad thing. God, I hadn't been alone in such a long time. Someone was always watching me or occupying everything I did in case I ran away. Both back at Evermore and here, I felt some of the weight move from my shoulders, relaxing them as I swung my feet aimlessly over the edge. The slow whooshing of the water beside me had me craning my neck further to see what else lay up here. Amongst the green and brown moss lay small daisies and water plants I had never seen before. Touching them, Most of them were damp or slimy. I recoiled from that feeling too fast. They were pretty to look at, not touch. Gazing up at the tiniest slither of moon possible, I sought the stars instead. The sky was clear, not a cloud to be seen. The brightest stars were beautifully outshowing the others. My knowledge of stars wasn't great. Arabella always knew more than me, taking up an astronomy class with her friends at school. I don't remember the last time I truly had a friend. Perhaps what I had here was friendship. Even if they were odd and furry, perhaps I could truly call them my friends. No, I couldn't. I didn't belong here. I had no purpose here. I was a human with nothing going for me except my ginger hair. Yep, that was it. They just wanted my hair. Crossing my arms at my internal battle, I huffed. That was it. I was going to jump off. I had to do it. I mean, I was up here and I sure as heck would not slide down the bumpy rocks to get back down. I had enough injuries for today. Thank you. Pushing myself to my feet, I swallowed as the lake grew distant. It was all brain trickery, and I shook my head to clear the thoughts. I'm sure I've jumped this high before. It's just been a few years. Slowly shuffling forward, I look around the edges of the lake in case there was someone with a camera ready. No one, of course, came to view this spectacular moment. Just sandy, muddy lake beds, the waterfall behind me, and the tiny slither of water at the far end where the lake continued into a river. Oh, little mini river. How cute you are from up here. Some of the river water brushed my ankles as I hesitated, the loudness of the fall growing closer as I neared the brink. Moving towards the edge of the rock, my toes crawled around it. One more shuffling step and I would be over. Wolf blood. Better save me now. Taking a deep breath, I slowly leaned forwards, as though guiding me. The water lapped at my legs, pushing my feet that centimeter further. My breath hitched as the free-falling motion caused my stomach to flip. My hair blew wildly. My arms arched above my head to prepare for entering the lake's edge. It was over within seconds. My body darted into the water with ease and I opened my eyes once I was under to stare up at the illuminating surface. A wonderfully warm buzz ran along my skin as I resurfaced. A laugh escaping me as the adrenaline coursed deep through my veins. Oh, I miss diving. When Dad would take me swimming, we often stuck to the rivers and streams, but a few times when Mom wasn't aware, he would take me to the lake outside of the border and teach me to dive. The one noticeable lake we called Beehive because in the summer, the trees were full of bees and nests. It had a small 3-meter rock that Dad would first teach me to jump from before we moved to the taller 6-meter one. It was all good fun. Back when I was a kid, I miss him. I sighed, falling back into the water. My head became engulfed in it until I slowly bobbed up to the surface, keeping my eyes closed. I forced the emotions away. I couldn't let them surface now. Not whilst I was under the amazing beauty of the moon and sky. Prying them open, the treetops created a small window to the heavens that I gazed up at for ages. The water supported my limbs, as though I was lying on a bed at home. I slowly drifted around, the current of the waterfall creating small waves in the lake. It was amazing how this was here, how this magical lake came to be, how it belonged here with these weird-ass wolves. Would I ever truly belong? The thought caused my heart to sink and tears to build in my eyes. No, 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 no. I huffed before pulling myself upright, the water rushing from my ears and leaving an itch behind. I pushed my hair behind my head as I tread water, rubbing my eyes to see better. What I didn't accept was the 6-foot-tall, dark-furred beast to be waiting for me when I reopened them. My mouth ran dry as I made eye contact with him across the lake. I was still very near the waterfall. He at the far side near the barbecues where they all disappeared not so long ago. He was sitting on his haunches, intently watching me. There was no movement, no sign that he was alive except for the slow blinking of his eyes. If I was any sane person, I would be terrified at being looked at by such a large, scary beast. But once again, his weird wolf magic had me on a way to comfortable leash. I scowled at his prying eyes, pushing myself backwards until the waterfall's current brushed my back. "What are you doing here?" I called, knowing he would hear me despite the deafening water. His ears twitched, head cocking. Above the rushing of water was the rushing of my breath as I fought to catch it. My heart pounded in my ears when he stood and strolled the perimeter of the lake. I watched his every move as he watched mine, only stopping when he was parallel to me. He pawed at the ground, a gesture I caught pretty quickly. He wanted me closer. I scoffed, shaking my head. "No thanks. Last time I was near one of you, I nearly lost my leg." A small growl left his snout, his upper lip curling with dissatisfaction. He stood about 3 meters away, and I took the time to observe him this close up. His eyes were not black, but in fact a deep, dark blue, much like the sky tonight. They sparkled with interest when he saw the observation I gave him. It must have fueled his fire because he lifted his head and tail like a proud little puppy. I snorted a laugh at his attempt to look good, oblivious to the fact he was a fierce predator. The wolf lowered its head, blinking cluelessly at me. I wondered if Phosphor would understand me. How did any of this even work? Was Osra gone now? Tilting my head, I ran my eyes along the rest of his body. Dark fur glinted in the starry night. Large heavy paws sank into the wet mud. His legs alone must have been the same size as mine. His large wide body the height of my head. How were they so large? Why not a normal wild wolf size? Why so strangely humongous? A small huff of breath left his lips, and I snapped my attention back to his face to see him gesture for me to get out. I crossed my arms and huffed dramatically. My skin was wrinkling and feels gross now, so I guess. Fine. But because I want to. Not because you told me so. I grumbled. A small bark of agreement had me jumping as I made my way out of the lake's edge. I surfaced close to him. The overwhelming musk of his fur matched what he smelt like as a human, only stronger. I tried to hide the hunger it made me feel by turning my back to him and walking around the lake's edge. The sound of his body shifting alerted me to the fact he was following, and a glimpse over my shoulder acknowledged that. Reaching the place where my towel was stored, I bent down to pick it up, only to jolt in surprise when a large, wet nose found its way between my legs. I spun around, shouting my disapproval, my towel flying to hit the dog in the nose. He huffed a breath, falling onto his rear. "Hey," I shrieked. "Keep your nose out of my business." He didn't react, his tongue darting out to pant slightly before licking at his nose. He dropped his head to my height, sniffing intently as I dragged myself, now facing him. I knew he was an animal, but damn, could he act a little more? I don't know. Civilized. Damn dogs. 23. I remained staring at the dog the whole time I dried myself in case his nose went more places it didn't belong. Wrapping my towel around myself, I wanted to sit down but didn't want to put myself at a disadvantage in case the wolf tried to tear my other leg off. "Are you able to understand me?" I wondered. The wolf's head cocked, his dark blue eyes blinking back in return. I sighed, shuffling my feet as I awkwardly looked around the landscape behind him. Once my attention was away from him, he began to move and I jerked in surprise when his large form suddenly dropped to the ground. He let out a loud exhale once his belly hit the dirt. his head still up and watching me. If he was on the ground, I hesitated before bending my legs and sitting myself on the blanket in front of him. His tail lifted and dropped to the ground once before his head fell to rest on his front paws. With my knees to my chest, I wrapped my arms around them and set my chin on my knees. My eyes ran along his body, amazed at how huge he was. His fur looked really thick and dense, and I wanted nothing more than to feel it. My toes curled when I came to make eye contact with him, the intense stare he had on me never wavering. Running my hands over my arms, I tried to avoid looking at his large snout. The thought of all his sharp teeth set me on edge, and ghosts of pain flashed down my sides. He suddenly raised his head, his nose twitching as he leaned closer to smell me. I froze, trying to control the harshness of my breathing as his large head grew nearer. His snout twitched, the coldness bumping my calf. He crawled closer, his paws digging into the dirt. It would be amusing if he wasn't so large and terrifying. My breath hitched, a small laugh of distress leaving my lips. "What are you doing?" He must have noticed my apprehension because he paused, his snout hovering above my knee. Those intense blue eyes were staring into mine, his ears pricking and swiveling to gauge my reaction. His head alone was the size of my torso, a thought that only just decided to greet my mind when he was 10 inches away from my face. He whimpered, bringing me back to the present when his tongue lapped at my wrist. It was large and warm, and the touch sent those weird goosebumps dancing along my skin. I felt my body want to succumb to his magic, but kept my spine straight and ready to run. "Your wolf magic isn't going to work on me." I shook my head. His ears flattened down the sides of his head, another whine leaving his throat. I had never heard such a noise. Never being around wildlife, I had only heard sounds through the television, and most of those were growling. Birds didn't whine and squirrels only chirped. He licked me again before slowly resting his snout on my knees, my hands darting away in surprise. I exhaled a shudder-wide breath when the warmth of his throat touched my skin, the sensation of him swallowing rubbing against my thigh. His eyes bored into mine, blinking softly as the rest of him remained still. He wasn't on edge, judging by his body language, and I ran my eyes along him just to make sure. I licked my lips nervously, my bare skin coming alive beneath his touch. He sure was relaxed considering the amount of magical tingles he was sending my way. My fingers twitched as I slowly moved them closer. His eyes flashed in my outstretched hand, which caused me to pause. But when they returned to me, his expression didn't change. Did dogs have expressions? I gritted my teeth and gave in to the desire for touch, brushing my fingers against the top of his head. The fur was soft and supple, and I dug them in deeper until the entire length of my fingers disappeared in his pelt, mating his skin. I sank my palm onto him, causing his shoulders to shudder and roll. I risked a glance at his eyes, centimeters from my wrist. They were still watching me, but a softness overcame them. I began to run my hand down his head. My fingers glided through the soft fur for a while, running over his ears and down his neck. His tail slowly swayed, raising from the ground every now and then. I found that the fur along his shoulders was thicker and dense, but that was as far as I could reach. Gliding my fingers back up to his head, I brought both hands to cup his ears, my thumbs brushing the softness inside before digging into the flesh behind them. His head twitched at that, his tail picking up in pace as it waved in the air. My lips quirked, a grin threatening to break through the nonchalance I tried to show. Looking back at his face, I realized he had closed his eyes, most likely enjoying the massage I must have been providing. Enthralled by him, I continued to run my hands through his fur, down the sides of his jowls and neck. He didn't move, only his tail swaying in the background. He was so lost. I found myself staring at the rest of him in awe. without even realizing it. The strange magic he had on me kept hold, drawing me closer to lean over him. I felt his nose brush the bare skin of my sternum as I ran my hands down his shoulders, the coolness of it leaving when I came to his face. Unconsciously, my hands had moved under their own influence, and it wasn't until I was holding his snout did I realize. I froze when his eyes snapped open, my hands cupping either side of the killing machine. Blue met blue, and time seemed to pause. The strange currents flowing through my body kept my worries at bay, whether they were adrenaline or wolf-induced. I felt. No, I knew he wasn't going to hurt me, as if confirming my thoughts. His mouth opened, tongue coming to run along my forearm. My thumbs twitched, brushing that wetness of his nose. It was surprisingly rubbery. The first shoulder the closer it got to his lips and covered in long bristly whiskers. Wait, do dogs have lips, like human lips? No, that would be weird. More time passed sitting under the moonlight until his head began to grow heavy. I shifted my weight and he immediately realized, raising his head until we were level. I paused my adjustments, the stark contrast of size whooshing over me. His head blocked out everything beyond him, my peripheral vision the only thing telling me that I was outside. He moved slowly, his tongue running across my jaw and along my lips, causing me to squeak in protest. My hands wiped at my mouth, rubbing the dog drool from my skin with disgust. It was slimy, gross. A wolfy bark of sarcastic laughter met my ears, and I paused my clean, up to glare at him as he stood. Oh, he was definitely not just a wolf. There was a mind in there that thought I was amusing. I narrowed my eyes, crossing my arms over my chest. The wolf's damn blue eyes dropped to my breasts, a puff of air leaving his nose. I grunted, dropping my arms in protest. Talk about ruining a moment. Where are you going? I asked. He was standing on all fours facing the other way as he observed the lake. I clambered to my feet, staggering to stand beside him. He stood proudly as he scanned the trees and water, his head higher than mine. If he was to lower his snout, we'd be similar in height. His shoulders met my eye line. I could just peek above his back if he wasn't so tense. I hesitated before running my hand along his back as I walked over to him, starting at his back hip and finishing at his shoulder. The fur was thicker, shorter and grimy on his body, not as soft as his head and neck fur. What you looking at? I wondered. Silly me. Talking to an animal. It wasn't like he could talk back to me. His head turned to glance at me before looking back to the lake. Point noted. He was looking at the surroundings. Of course. I took a step closer to the water, the air in my body still warm considering the time of night. It was nice to not feel the cold. Being lower in the mountains definitely had its advantages. More springtime. Sinking my toes into the lake, I stopped when it met my ankles, swirling my toes along the surface. The wolf pretended to not watch me. I could feel his attention on me. This lake is amazing. I breathed. I have never felt so at peace before. Glancing over my shoulder to look at him, I found him watching me with full interest, his head cocked to the left. A small laugh escaped me. Seeing the large wolf look so innocent was rather cute. His head flicked back to the side, and before I could speak again, he was running. I jerked in fright when his large form flew around the edge of the lake and disappeared into the trees. It happened so quickly I wasn't sure it even occurred. There were no sounds anymore, just my rapidly increasing heart rate and the fresh breaths of wind along my jaw. Sighing, I realized I was left alone once more. Retreating from the lake's water, I began making my way to the blanket to get comfy again when a distant rumbling met my ears. I paused halfway to the base, turning to where the wolf had disappeared. It was thunderous, a continuous, rapid beating of something along the ground. I could feel the earth shaking as the noise grew closer. What was going on? Was a black hole about to swallow me whole? Was the lake about to combust? Sneaking a glance at it, it remained where it was, only this time its movements grew. Large rumbling accompanied the whirlpools and waves on the water's surface. The sound of small yips and grumbles met my ears when the thunder began to slow in pace but increase in volume. The sudden intrusion of wolves flew through the tree line and I stumbled back in surprise. One by one they began to charge into the water. Loud splashes and excited barking filled the air. Wolves going into the water and humans coming up to the surface. I stood stoic, wide-eyed as the entire pack entered the lake. The final few stragglers trotting in with lolling tongues. 𝐊𝐢𝐬. I blinked from the daze, following the sound of my name. It sounded an awful lot like 𝐏𝐚𝐜. I shakily smiled at her, eyeing the various people surrounding her. She raised her hand in the air and waved me over. I gulped nervously but nodded and made my way back into the water. The more my feet sank into the depths, the less anxiety I felt. I welcomed the freedom with a happy sigh, swimming over to where she hovered in the middle of the mass. Her hair was drenched, a wild and crazy look in her eye. Eve was beside her, an unusual wild look on her expression too. How was it? I wondered, looking between the two. Well, Eve took her time, but it was so good. We hunted a few stags, left the does. Of course, being so close to the baby season. She grinned, her canines glinting back at me. I love running. I love enjoying it, Eve muttered, rolling her eyes. You know, taking in the sights, the feel of the pack. Maya snorted, splashing her sister with water. The slight movement had my eyes dropping, and it was then I realized she had no top on. 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬. You're, I stammered. She followed my gaze and laughed. Oh yeah. Well, we shift into huge wolves. We don't get to keep our clothes. What? I squeaked. A sudden horror overcame me as I looked around the 100 or so people around me. Very naked people. You're all naked. I shrieked. A few turned to give me curious laughs, but the two before me just laughed. It was strange to see Eve so loose. Perhaps she needed to go on more runs. It was more obvious the two were related now. Both relaxed with crazy eyes. Everyone here was crazy. So I am in a lake, and everyone is naked. I whispered. Everyone? Maya smirked, yet just wonderful. This was some twisted, weird 𝐊𝐢𝐳 if I ever heard of one. What did you get up to anyway? Eve wondered. I shrugged. I just swam, climbed the waterfall, jumped off, practically snuggled with your alpha. Really? You jumped off? Maya grinned. I didn't take you as the adventurous type. I rolled my eyes, scoffing. I love to dive. Go on then. Show me. She teased. Later, I murmured. I'm surrounded by dozens of naked shifters right now. They laughed. Why splashing me with a large grin. I scowled before splashing her back, causing her to gasp before a war ensued. It continued as a game for a while before I launched myself at her, my hands grabbing her head and pushing her under. Her arms wrapped around my hips, pulling me under at the same time. I didn't last long under there, pulling away when I found numerous genitals surrounding me. Brushing the hair from my face, I groaned. So many naked people. Hey, I thought you didn't care about nudity. I don't. I shook my head. But this is like sharing bath water with strangers. They laughed again, making room as 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐳 made her way over. We talked a little before a strange hush fell upon everyone. The girls before me were looking in one direction behind me, and I turned myself around to see what the lack of commotion was in aid of. Curious. If something could shut MY up, then it had to be something big. 24. I see it now. Why everyone shut up. It was big. And I mean, like I see it. It was just dangling there for all to stare at. Its length and girth were as impressive as the rest of him. Nobody else seemed to care, to focus on the moon or the atmosphere. Just me. I seemed to be the only one mesmerized. I didn't need to stare at 𝐊𝐲𝐬's groin for much longer when he let out a low whistle and everyone looked at the moon. I kept my eyes on him, taking in his bare skin covered in dark tattoos. I have seen an elder back in Evermore of similar markings claiming they had earned them for their strength. 𝐊𝐲𝐬's were lines and swirls of black ink, slinking around his shoulders and down his back like wings, carving into his pectoral muscles before branching out down his sides and curving over his hips. Few floated down his thighs like tree branches, none daring to go close to the monster between his legs. I mean, come on. Was the tattist intimidated? Because I would be. He's going to try the ritual. Why he whispered. I stayed silent, much like everyone else. When the alpha descended into the water, the usual comforting warmth of the water grew stronger, like a direct buzz of heat directly into my abdomen. I grew unusually warm at that moment, but brushed it off as nerves. No need to overthink my bodily functions and cause an anxiety moment. 𝐊𝐲𝐬's eyes scanned the various bobbing heads of his pack before inevitably landing on me. I felt the direct touch of his gaze, zapping me right down to the soul. His dark blue eyes burned into me, a string attaching us both taut as he walked deeper. I wanted to go over to him, to embrace him and loosen the tight hold. It grew harder to breathe the further into the water he swam. My chest constricted with every step. His eyes never leaving mine, only seemed to make it feel worse. What was this? I felt like I was suffocating, like every weight was holding me down. Warm hands landed on my shoulders, and I jumped, looking at the culprit. You need to take your clothes off. It won't work if you are dressed, Eve murmured. I frowned. Now I was to be a part of this weird cult. Looking around, everyone was staring at their alpha as he neared the center of the lake. I was trapped amid various wolves and knew if I tried to escape, I would disrupt this. Giving Eve a brief nod, she helped me out of my bikini, a struggle to do when one is treading water. She pushed the scraps of bra into my hands, her hands clenching around mine before she helped me out of the bottoms. It was weird. I had never felt affected by my nudity before, but as soon as the security of those pants was gone, I felt the intrusion of vulnerability hit me. The water brushed my most intimate areas, my body on display, scars and all for everyone to see. The bikini had covered some of my worst markings, the ones along my hips and under my breasts, and left me exposed. It was weird. I gripped onto the slippery clothes with vigor when the last of the invisible strains 𝐊𝐤𝐬 𝐑𝐞𝐝 looked away. My heart thumped loudly in my ears, my lungs straining against my ribs. I felt so hot, so unusual, as the rushing of blood in my ears fueled my adrenaline. It was silent when 𝐊𝐲𝐬 stopped in the center. His eyes flickered back to me briefly, taking in my pained expression. Nothing passed through his eyes as he broke the eye contact again, closing them as he tilted his head back. He fell backwards like a starfish, submerging into the water. The zing grew, running along my bare skin and warming my stomach. Instinctuant, meaty, warm, confusion, desire. I felt it all. The lake's gentle current brushed along my back and bare breasts, goosebumps strazing on my skin, trying to distract myself from the growing panic. I looked up. The vibrance of the full sky caught my attention. The glinting stars and lack of a complete moon sent a shiver down my spine. My eyes fluttered, my head sinking further into the water until my lips grazed the surface. 𝐊𝐴𝐺𝐸 ran over me, but I didn't react. Rather embraced it with a sharp inhale. The lake would take care of me. I could feel it. It was primal, a truth I knew without even thinking. The sound of moving water was the next thing to break me out of the content trance. My eyes blinking open to find the stars still shining brightly above me. I dropped my gaze to find Oscar resurfacing, and murmuring sounded all around me. His chest was heaving, water pouring down his skin. His large, beautifully sculpted arm came to push his hair from his face. His lips parting as water ran down his nose. An itching arousal overcame me. I wanted to touch him. I wanted to feel him. I inched closer, slowly moving until I was beside 𝐖𝐴. Her arm came out to prevent me, a gentle shake of her head stopping me. My eyebrows furrowed, but when I looked back ahead to see Oscar swimming back to the lake's edge, I realized it was over already. Once he was out, his shoulders sagged ever so slightly before squaring off as he turned to face us. "Never mind. We shall try next time," he spoke. Never mind? Never mind? What does he mean? Did no one else feel it? Did no one feel the overwhelming restriction of their breath, the beauty of the sky, or the warmth as the water held them? Looking around at the various frowns, I realized they hadn't. I had felt it. I was so sure of that. Why did only I feel it? Was I making this up? No, I couldn't be. I felt something. Something that drew me closer to the alpha male. An invisible, amazingly annoying string linked the two of us together. Mumbling filled the air as many of the very naked people swam out of the lake and I sighed before joining 𝐖𝐴 and Eve as they left too. I scrunched my bikini in my hands and wrung it out once we were on dry land. Walking over to our spot, I wrapped a towel around my body to dry off. It appeared the others were already dry, their hair not as wet as mine. Eve noticed my grimace at her frizzing hair and laughed. "We're hot. We burn hot. Our hair dries faster." I pouted. "That's unfair. What do I get?" "An amazing ability to fall over grass." She grinned at me, shrugging as she pulled a dress over her head. I patted my body dry, noticing a lot of the other wolves pulling on clothes as others merely grabbed their stuff and began to hike back to the house. They all seemed disappointed, weathered, and I could see it in the way their shoulders sagged so. "If you felt nothing, what were you meant to feel?" I wondered, dropping my towel to pull the large shirt over my head. Eve watched me dress, a large crease in her brows as her sadness shone through. "It's meant to feel like bliss, like you're complete, like all of us are one unit, drawn to protect each other as we banish our ill thoughts. That's deep." 𝐿𝐴 hummed before snorting a laugh. Eve knocked her knuckles against her sister's arm with no effect. "It gets my point across. And the naked thing. Oh, that's just a way to look at everyone's ass." 𝐖𝐴 snorted. Eve scolded her, crossing her arms. "Being bare connects you with the water and the moon. Less friction if there are no clothes. Just felt a little strange." I muttered, sliding on my shoes. Thought I was going to be sacrificed. They laughed at my expense, but I was glad because it changed the topic from the weird naked ritual to something else. I had felt something in that lake, and if nobody else did, then I didn't want to out myself. "Hey, 𝐊𝐴." I spun around to see Piper approaching me, a wide grin on her still very naked body. I blinked to act as though I wasn't staring, but I couldn't help admire her figure. It wasn't often you saw a naked woman in my town, and Piper was an excellent representation every man's wet dream. It was no wonder she and Osra were so close. Piper, I breathed, looking back at her face. Mind if I borrow your towel? Mine's on the other side of the lake. She cocked her head. I shrugged, passing her my towel. Sure. She took it with a warm smile, running it along her neck. Thanks. I just hate wet hair on my neck. I gave her a small laugh of agreement, turning to see the three companions of mine slither away. Maya gave me a double thumbs up as they walked away, her less than inconspicuous eyes running down Piper's ass. I chewed on my lip to hide a laugh, looking back from her to find Piper stepping closer to give me the towel back. Thanks, she chirped, pushing her half-dry hair down her back. Wanna walk back to the house? Okay? I nodded, smiling at her. Do you need anything? No, it's only my towel. I'm sure someone will pick it up. She shrugged. I frowned, looking around at the still junk-ridden lakeside. I felt guilty for leaving it all here, a small part of me seeing it as wrong to leave the wonderful lake in such disarray. But as we neared the waterfall, I saw a few smaller and thankfully dressed people bending over to pick up the discarded items. So, what did you think of the entire lake thing? Total bummer, right? She snorted, her slender arms swinging beside her as she skipped a couple of times, drawing my eyes away from her bouncing breasts. I sheepishly grinned. I was so not used to see so much nudity, and although I was used to the lack of clothing myself, to be on the opposing side was weird. Wolves were weird. I get there naked when they shift and run hot. But if everyone walks around naked every day, I think I may fall into a flustered mess. 𝐿𝐤, she teased, linking her arms from mine. Sorry, I blushed. I'm just not used to all of this. The nudity or the magical lake, she teased. I wrinkled my nose. Both. I could get used to the lake. Though, that was amazing. It's so warm, right? She grinned. But I get it. It must be weird to come from such a closed-off place to here. We are a lot wilder than humans. In the older years, packs tended to just wear skirts woven from skin and string, and tops that only wrapped around our necks. It was easier to shift. We could just slide them off in one go, and if your wolf was small enough, the top would stay on your neck. I laughed at the image of a wolf wearing a bra, shaking the idea away. How can you stopped and started wearing normal clothes? You have no need for them, right? Being hot all the time, and surely it's easier to shift. We feel more connected to the earth and moon when we are bare, but we do it because as times have modernized, we have had to fit in. She shrugged. Some of us still are nude around the pack house, mostly around full moons. I hummed as we walked through the trees, and Piper continued to tell me about her upbringing. She visits often, being betrothed to Osra. It sounded like a setup, to be fair. An arranged marriage by her parents 2 years ago. It seemed much like my own, but she genuinely seemed happy about it. I think he had grown on her. I mean, who could blame her? He was an attractive, yet broody male with an ample structure for the hungriest of us. My body warmed as the image of him in the water resurfaced in my mind. The way the water dripped from his hair and down his lips and chest. The way the water highlighted his hips in a sharp V line, as if calling me, like a moth to a flame. I wanted to touch him, so drawn to him. I wondered if he felt the same. We were just about to break the tree line, Piper gushing about the time she first met Osra, when the so-called man walked out from behind a tree. clad in just some cotton shorts. We stumbled to a stop, Piper's laughing simmering down, until a broad smile covered her cheeks. "Ezra, you surprised us," she chimed, despite the naked beauty calling his name. His eyes were locked onto mine. I felt the heat. The intensity of his gaze held me, the meaning getting lost in translation. He glued me to the spot, the dark blue so powerful that it made me shiver. Piper pulled me closer, using her body heat to warm me up. His eyes fell to where we gripped each other, before falling down to my barely clad bottom. If I so much as took a large step or bent over, he and everyone else would get another view of my naked ass. Not that anyone seemed to care around here. "Asra?" His head snapped to Piper, his tongue darting out to his lips, yes. Just like that, the spell was broken, and I exhaled, not even realizing I was holding my breath. "Did you come to find me?" she wondered. Another brief glance towards me before he nodded, as if realizing her very naked situation. I felt awkward, shifting my weight. His lips quirked with a small smirk as he glanced at her, and I felt a slight twinge of something strike me in the heart. Was it jealousy? It couldn't be. He wasn't mine. They were intended. The lake just messed with my head. "Yes," he nodded. Piper didn't move, looking down at me. "Will you be okay going back alone? I think your friends are already inside." I looked towards the impossibly tall building in the distance, nodding firmly. "I'll be okay." "Thanks." "Piper." She unlinked her arm, grinning as she bent down to kiss my cheek. "Okay? Get some sleep. Don't wash until the morning. It's good for your skin." She would know about flawless skin. Piper giggled as she took Asra's hand, and I cleared my throat before beginning to walk away. In my haste to escape the nudity festival, my shirt had risen, but no matter how hard I tried to keep it down, it wouldn't stay in all the right places. I could either walk slowly and hide it all, or get the fuck out of there. So I chose the latter, and speed walked towards the pack house, the breeze up my ass making me go faster, away from the strange feelings and the naked people and towards my only source of comfort. My room. 25 that night I had trouble sleeping. An uncomfortable cramp kept me up at night that had me counting the weeks and days since I had been here. The urge to escape became stronger as the sleepless hours went on. I needed to get out. I had alpha blood in my system. I healed exceptionally well. So now was my time to escape, before it wore off and I became feeble once more. Of course, my monthly bleed would come when I woke after a night of painful stomach aches that had me gasping for breath. I had never had such strong pains before. Perhaps the night in the magical lake decided it would be a good cleanse for my body. Perhaps my body just wanted me to get eaten by the wolves. That morning I climbed my way out of the bed, ripping the blood-stained sheets off with me. I carried them into the bathroom and drained them under the tap before I showered. I hoped the blood wouldn't stain, but I had not done my laundry here before. I could not find any cleaning products, not even salt. In the bathroom, once I was clean, I rifled through the cupboard once more in search of some sanitary product, only to come up short. I usually wore a cup, being the most comfortable and discreet option back home. Plus, Darius had enjoyed it. It meant he would never have to see blood in my underwear. Such a strange man. But here, I couldn't even find a sanitary towel. So I had to make do with toil a troll and hope I found Eve quickly. Dressing in the largest clothes I had available, I breathed through another wonderful stomach cramp as I gathered the sheets and made my way downstairs. It was early, around 7, and I hoped that meant there would be less traffic around. I stumbled across a female in the kitchen, dressed in soft cotton clothes as she organized the kitchen. I assumed she was one of these maids Eve told me about and cleared my throat softly to announce my presence. "Excuse me," I mumbled, and she turned to face me. "Could you help me find the laundry room? Please. I've forgotten where it is." Her eyebrows creased in confusion as she wiped her hands on her apron. "You don't need to do that. Miss. Someone will come round later." I shook my head, stepping away from her outstretched hands. I felt embarrassed, heat flushing my cheeks as I let out a shaky laugh. "I know. It's just, I would rather do these by myself." I worried. Her head cocked as she studied me and then the white sheets in my hands. I watched with pain horror as her nose wrinkled and nostrils flared before an understanding took over her features. "Oh, I see." She smiled bashfully. "Nothing to be ashamed of. I'll show you where it is." I breathed an awkward thank you and followed her as she led me out of the kitchen. She had light blonde hair and a ponytail and warming brown eyes. She was more petite than some wolves I had come across, around my height with soft curves. Perhaps the hierarchy was like wild animals. Eve said they were primal creatures, so perhaps the weaker wolves became the maids. Ezra was strong and large, and he was the alpha, so made sense. Right? We walked through the kitchen, my hungry eyes taking in the gleaming white countertops and shining golden wolf-shaped handles. I loved this kitchen. Opening a door at the bottom of the room, we walked into a brief hallway before realization dawned on me. Eve had taken me around the house before, sure, but I had only been in here once and my brain forgot. But now I was here. I soon remembered this room. The washing machines were foreign to me, and the maid must have noticed because she hesitated on her way out. "Are you sure you don't need my help?" she wondered. I chewed on my lip, eyeing the shiny sink and various machines. There were 8 washing machines along one wall, stacked upon each other, and opposite were 8 drying machines. All were shiny silver with black details. The cupboards and floor were still so bright and clean. The sides empty and organized. How this place was so tidy. I need all of their secrets. I swallowed down my pride and gave her a soft nod. She beamed, coming towards me to take some sheets out of my hand. "We'll scrub what we can by hand in the sink first. Then I will show you how to use the machines." She smiled, turning on the hot tap to wet the blotchy stains. "Thank you," I muttered. "I've just never used machines before." She cocked her head as she scooped some powder and rubbed it in with the scoop itself. I watched her intently, the powder foaming and bubbling. "You're from the secret village, right?" she wondered. "What did you use there?" "Not machines." I shook my head. "We did our clothes by hand. Growing up, we had little and couldn't afford machines. When I moved out, someone came and did laundry twice a week for me." She nodded slightly, studying me again. "Well, I'm Serenity, but people call me Ren. It's nice to meet you. 𝐊𝐢𝐬." I smiled in return. She grinned again before rinsing the soap from the fabrics. She bundled them in her hands and guided me to one of the lower washing machines. Opening the door, she pushed the fabric in before clicking the door closed. "Right? So this is whites, which means we wash them solo. No colors," she explained. "This button here is on. Then we turn the dial to cotton. Since your sheets are cotton, each garment has a label with how to wash. Yours are the nice Egyptian sheets. So we wash them on a low spin and temperature. Pre-washing them in the sink helps the stains." I followed her instructions silently, noting where things were kept. There were so many kinds of soap and washing aids. I think I may need labels. Once she hit start, we stepped back to admire her handiwork. I thanked her for showing me, awkwardly shifting my weight. Anytime. She smiled. She never seemed to not be smiling, a slight buzz of radiant energy surrounding her. She helped me without judgment, and I really respected her for that. "Do you need any more help?" she asked. I hesitated, taking in her kind face as I debated on asking her my next question. "What is it?" she wondered, noticing my hesitance. Damn lack of poker face. Where do I find the sanitary products? I cringed though. "We have a storage in here actually, but most of the stuff we get ourselves from the store," she explained, walking to a corner cupboard and opening it. Inside there were a few boxes full of sanitary products, but none of them took my eye. I hated the feel of pads and did not want to wear a tampon. Heck no. I grabbed a box of pads anyway, deciding it was better than nothing. "I'd be happy to take you to the store, but I have to finish in the kitchen." I raced to my feet, shaking my head at her. "Oh no. Please. You've already helped me so much. I will go ask my friend to take me. Don't worry about it. Okay? Thank you, 𝐊𝐤. No thank you. I would have been lost and embarrassed without you." I blushed. She gave me another award-winning smile before leaving the room. I exhaled heavily when the door swung close behind her, my stress levels evaporating with every slow breath I took, clearing my throat. I made my way into the toilet next door and sorted my wonderful situation before I looked for a familiar face. Washing my hands, I left the room feeling a lot better. The sheets would take another hour before they were done, which would be enough time for me to find someone to show me where I can get supplies. Sure, I didn't have any money, so I would have to figure out how this whole thing worked. I came across 𝐖𝐨𝐳 first. Her wide, happy eyes peeking at me from the top step. 𝐊𝐤? Good morning. That was a morning person if I ever saw one. Hey, 𝐖𝐨𝐳. I was wondering if you could help me. I smiled. Sure. What's up? How are you feeling? Did the lake give you a good sleep? The opposite. I shook my head, a laugh bubbling out of my chest. I had cramps all night, but I just spoke with Serenity in the utility. She showed me where the feminine supplies are, but I was wondering if you could show me where the store was. She blinked for a moment, taking in the mumbling of my words. Oh, the pharmacy. I can take you. Want to go now? I was about to go for a jog. Anyway, scanning her appearance, it only just clocked to me she was dressed in shorts and a tank top. I blushed, but nodded and thanked her as she led me out of the door. Apparently, Village is a small plaza with pretty tiled floors, small green shrubbery, and white flowers littered with quaint brown benches. It was something out of a fairy tale. I was just waiting for the butterflies and white doves. And here, 𝐖𝐨𝐳 ushered me into a sterile store with a large green plus on the outside. She led me to an aisle and gestured dramatically to the various, and I mean various, assortment of products. My cheeks flushed as I took in the vast amount of things to choose from. They're so brightened, plentiful, I commented. She snorted, a lot different from human world. Huh. I nodded, bending down to pick up a couple of options. I'm surprised they even have cups. I've never actually tried one. 𝐖𝐨𝐳 hummed, plucking one out of my hand. Don't you feel it? I snorted, shaking my head. None of it's in right. She hummed, scanning the box once more before depositing it into my hand. You'll find there's a lot more openness in this world. The men really do care for you and monthly bleeds aren't a taboo. They practically worship you. It's great. Her laughter had me smile. mostly in disbelief. Where I came from, they locked us away for most of the time. Men didn't like it. The smile on her face dimmed, a twitch of a grimace showing on her mouth. That's human males for you. Can't appreciate what a God-given child-bearing body is capable of. We laughed again before I decided on a cup type. Looking for a price, 𝐿𝐈𝐲 noticed my predicament. Oh, don't worry about that. I'll put it on the tab. I murmured as she led me to the front desk. Her hands gripped the edge as she peered around the various electronic equipment and assortment of papers. She plucked the box from my hand and passed it to the male behind the computer, rattling a total to which 𝐖𝐨𝐲 just clicked her tongue. On the tab? Please. She smiled sweetly. The young male glanced at me. Which one? 𝐿𝐈𝐲 looked at me too, a smirk coating her features. Alpha, please. My eyes widened, but the boy only nodded, pressing a few buttons before dispensing a receipt. Luna? He bowed his head, passing me the paper. I went to reply about how that wasn't me, but 𝐿𝐈𝐲 had her hands beneath my armpit before I could even mutter a no. She pushed me out of the store, a laugh escaping her as I stumbled over a broken tile. Alpha's tab, I gasped, looking down at the receipt. My eyes widened when I saw 𝐶𝐻's name along the bottom, along with what I had purchased. You are his mate. It's obvious. Most of the pack knows it now, so may as well use that to your advantage. She shrugged. I pocketed the receipt, my hands clutching the box in my hand so hard it dented. It's not right. It will be. Eventually, she took my arm, squeezing it tightly. If only she knew what was to happen later that day.